One.
Like, Julia, hey, I'm Kevin, we were gonna decide this, we've been together, so.
I'm like,
I got rid of it, like,
yes, yeah, happy to do it.
You know, I do have a fire.
I know, I'm trying. I mean,
You have been around.
Yeah, well, you were living in
I know, we are on time, it's not really, we have plenty of time, but just want to get started. Since we have a smaller group, this is really loud. I was thinking, we could all just go around and say hi. I know sometimes it takes a bit longer when we have a big group, but I think today it'll just work out nicely. So, if we just want to say our name, organization, and, also, I guess, what we're most excited about, in the future of this work group, or if you don't know, the future, one project that you're really excited about working on right now, that would be awesome. My name is Maddie Billy, and I work at the American Heart Association. I am the work group chair for this, and I am really excited about the potential of heads coming together and forming a very creative and meet people where you're at type campaign to really teach people about hunger. So I'm excited about that. Thanks.
Good afternoon, or good morning, I guess. My name is Max, and I work with CDHS. I'm in the Office of Economic Security. I think the thing I'm most excited for is the social marketing campaign. So I'm really excited to hear what the Governing Council had to say about our proposal.
Hi, I'm John Rosa, I'm from CDHS as well, and I actually come from a newspaper background, so this is the first group like this I've been a part of. I'm just excited to see where this heads. I really have no expectations or anything along those lines, so just want to see where it goes.
Good morning, I'm Barry Partisan. I'm from the Office of Economic Security, and I'm excited about our department and the money we've recently gotten for our outreach campaigns.
Oh, yeah. Hi, I'm Tawana.
Yep, yeah. There you go.
Oh, green.
One more time.
Oh, there, sweet. I'm Tawana Henderson. I'm with Beyond the Classroom, and I'm just excited about, I've been to a lot of the meetings, and so just excited about getting going and getting moving everything forward.
Hey, I'm Kevin Warner with Trailhead Institute, and just excited to take another look at these proposals and figure out some action steps moving forward. So it's really exciting.
Hi, I'm Andrew Stricker, also with Trailhead, and I'm just really excited to finally see some of the work groups getting traction and moving forward with some proposals and seeing where things can go.
Hello, I'm Jacqueline Linson. I'm with the Colorado Health Foundation, and actually last month was my first meeting, so it was really exciting to hear how far this work group has gotten, and then really to kind of hear more about the proposals and to see this work going forward.
I'm Jace Woodrum. I am also with the Colorado Health Foundation. This is my first meeting, and I'm excited to talk about research and public opinion and messaging with this group. That's my focus here at the Foundation.
Hi, my name is Sarah Rosberg, and I'm from Hunger Free Colorado, kind of sitting in for Ellie today. I am very excited for the materials that we see.
Hi, I am Jennifer Banyan, and I am here to support in a consultant role. I am very excited and very appreciative of Maddie's leadership behind the scenes. She's been working really hard and very in a very smart way, and I just wanted to appreciate you now because I don't know if everybody knows how much you've been putting into this. So thank you for your enthusiasm and what you're all bringing to this role.
Hi, I'm Michelle, and I provide communication support to the Blueprint overall and have been working specifically with Workgroup 1 around public will and SNAP marketing. I'm fired up because it's good to do. We've done a lot of planning, and I am too Midwestern to just plan. I have to do as well. So it's been really exciting to see the doing commence or almost commence. And on a personal note, it's really exciting to be at the time of the year when the Braves can put food in their own gardens. I do have some good hail netting. So, I'm excited that we're in the spring and I can get my tomato plants out.
Awesome, and we have a few people on the phone, and before we go to the phone, do you want to say hi really quick? Thanks. Go ahead.
Vinny Cervantes with Denver Alliance for Street Health Response and the Poor People's Campaign.
And I see Kelly on the phone and maybe one other person. I'm not sure how it works exactly, but Kelly, do you want to say hi?
Sure. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. I'm with the Piton Foundation, and I oversee a program that is focused on raising awareness of the Earned Income Tax Credit as well as free tax prep. So this is my first time joining the group. I hope to meet you all at the next meeting in person, but I'm really interested in seeing how our work will intersect with yours, your efforts, and how this work comes together across the work groups.
Thanks, Kelly. And then I see one other person called in, 720-982-5182.
Hey, it's Leslie from Project Angel Heart. Sorry I can't join in person today, but I was really excited to hear any feedback from the Governance Council, so wanted to make sure I popped in.
Thanks so much. So I'm going to give you guys a really quick high-level overview on the Governing Council proposals, and then we're going to get into kind of what we foresee as next steps and processes. The goals today are really to figure out how we can move our proposals into action. I'm excited that we have come as far as we have, but want to make sure that we keep this momentum up and hopefully can present some tangible items coming soon. So, first thing, I went to the Governing Council and presented our proposals. To be transparent, they are still kind of figuring out the processes that they're going to follow as Erin comes on. But I would say, all in all, they were really excited about our proposals. They were excited to see we'd moved as far as we had and that we had a proposal to share, and that, you know, we were really following some things and presenting some things that were highly in need. The biggest feedback I got was having a little bit more detail and asking for some more thought out, more comprehensive proposals. I wouldn't say they criticized us by any means of coming to them with a more high level proposal, but simply said, here are some things to think about. And that's what I want to bring to you guys today as we're working through these processes. What I want to challenge us to do is find a way that we can build subcommittees or somehow work groups that we can pull together some more comprehensive proposals with those items and do the research that we need to have those in hand. Some of the key things that the Governing Council asked us for are, you know, who are the key partners that we think we're going to be working with? What can they bring to the table in terms of expertise, in terms of in-kind donations and resources? So what I mean by that is not necessarily here's money, but here are staff that are experts in communications and outreach, or here are staff who can create video for you, things like that. They also really wanted to make sure we were thinking through some things like, how are we going to measure this? What are our goals with each of these, and what are the metrics and outcomes that we're going to be thinking about? And then the other thing that came to mind was, how are we making sure particularly with the social marketing and public will campaign, how are we making sure that we're reaching the target groups that we want to reach? So, you know, we've set at a really high level, we want to reach everyone. We want to reach the policymakers, we want to reach the people who are experiencing hunger, as well as those people who are maybe have more income and aren't experiencing hunger, but we want to make sure they're aware of the issue so that they understand the economic impacts, the overall health outcome impacts, the educational impacts that hunger has on our whole society. And so one big pushback or thought rather was, how do we make sure that the people who are experiencing hunger are able to take this and take action? And so what are the actionable items we hope to see when we educate people about hunger to make sure that this is effective? So that's a really high level. Today we're going to go through some thoughts that we have in terms of the process that we may or may not follow to figure out, you know, our next steps in this comprehensive proposal. And I would love your guys' feedback, thinking about those things, and then thinking also about just overall, as you've gone through the process of being strategic and thinking through big projects, what may be missing? What do we need to change? Those types of things. And we put together some questions to help frame that conversation, but want to make sure you guys feel free to speak as well. So with that, Kevin, do you mind pulling up the slides that Michelle sent? I'm going to turn it over to Michelle. We're first going to go over the SNAP marketing proposal, and then we're going to go over the public will building campaign. Just so you guys kind of know the content of today, we also would like to talk about some fact sheets that are also another opportunity to share information, kind of collateral that we can share, and I would love to touch on that as well at the end of the meeting. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle.
Great, thanks, sorry. So I just wanted to take a minute and just get general agreement from the group about how we can frame this effort. And I want to say up front that just as we discussed when we went to the Governing Council the first time, their processes are still being formed now. So I don't know if all of this is going to be exactly right. But I do believe that if we can answer the vast majority of their questions in advance, we're probably in the right ballpark, even if they want to see it in a different structure or they'd like it presented in a different sort of fashion. I think answering the big questions up front for them will get us very far down the road, and then we can tweak it once they have had a chance to sort of formalize the process they want to see us engage in. So
can I add one thing, Michelle? So one thing that was brought up, and it was the very beginning of the meeting, is the funding mechanism here. And that's something Michelle will bring up today. But I just don't, I want you to know that was a big priority, but I also, as Michelle said, we aren't sure what the right proposal is or whatnot, but it is something we will be thinking about as well. So I apologize, I forgot to say that was a priority. Yeah.
So the general structure that we're thinking about here is that this work group form itself into a couple of different subcommittees. One to deal with the SNAP / a little bit of WIC marketing proposal, and one to deal with the public will building proposal. And let me say that we'd be thrilled if everybody in the work group joined both subcommittees, and it was just a big bunch of extra work group 1 meetings all together. We've got a lot of experience at this table. We've got a lot of smarts at this table, and I'd love to harness that to the good of both of these efforts. Just for your thinking up front, I think if you have limited bandwidth, we will likely be getting through the SNAP marketing piece much more quickly than the public will building piece. That's a much larger machine that we need to think through. And I would expect the SNAP marketing effort to only take maybe, a couple hours a week for a month or 2 months at the most. So if time constraints are a consideration for you, please, that's my best guess. It may get a little bit more than that, but I don't think it'll be as involved in effort as the public will building effort. So just for your thinking in terms of what you might like to volunteer a little additional time to. We've also thought about a structure where our work group 1, during the time of these subcommittees, will take a break. So we won't meet as a full group for a couple months or couple or 3 months while we work through the subcommittee work, so you won't have these 2-hour commitments during that period of time. Additionally, it's summer, and we respect the fact that, we're Colorado, and we just all take the summer off, kind of. So I just wanted to sort of give you the overarching structure that we are thinking of, and just kind of gauge the room. Does that sit okay with everyone in terms of how we are going to work through these to get to a more robust proposal that we can go to the Governing Council? Does anybody have any other thoughts or changes you'd like to see to the structure I proposed? Okay.
Michelle, I just had a question.
Yes.
So you see the 2 subgroups. Do you see any additional groups underneath that, or just the primary 2?
I don't know.
Okay.
And in fact, that's actually part of what I wanted to talk about with the group today was, what I have lined out for both of the proposals are kind of like the big buckets of information and work I think we need to do in the subgroups. And if we decide that it's easiest as a subgroup for these 5 people with particular expertise in this area to go off and do that research and come back to the subcommittee, then they should. I'd like for us to, it seemed to make the most sense to me that we get the subgroups together, subcommittees together, and we see what expertise we have at the table, and then give people responsibilities based on their expertise or their interest. Okay, so that is the structure we'll pursue. All of the work of both of the subcommittees will live on our Google Drive for our work group. So if you do not have bandwidth to dedicate to this cause during the summer months, you will be able to stay completely current with what the subgroups are doing, the subcommittees are doing by just checking in on the Google Drive on a regular basis and seeing. We'll try to post all of our documents, and we'll be doing. I'm certain I will be doing some note taking during the subcommittee meetings and all. So if you just can't make it work this summer, you can stay abreast with us until we get back to regular meetings in the early fall. Okay? Let's talk a little bit about the SNAP marketing materials first. Again, I think this will be the easiest, quickest lift in terms of getting to a solid proposal, but there are some important issues that we need to get worked out. As you all know, before we created this proposal, at the direction of this work group, I did some research and Jennifer did some research. And by the way, we are always available to all of you for any requests that you have that we can fulfill in terms of research or communications. And so just wanted to make sure that you all know that. I think you do, but just in case you forgot, there you go. So as you all remember, we did some research for you before we put together the proposal for the SNAP and WIC marketing, largely to make sure that we knew what best practices are. That we had some exemplar campaigns that have happened in other states that have been successful that we could replicate or outright plagiarize if they would allow us to, in order to not, spend a huge amount of time and money when we already have good material there that we could use. And we also wanted to make sure that we were fully aware of what was going on in the state of Colorado, what resources already existed. And so while I think I had a pretty robust list, I suspect there are a few things floating around out there that I am still unaware of and didn't get a hold of. So we would want to do, in the research category, finish cataloging all the existing marketing materials that are in the state of Colorado right now and in use in different ways. Identify successful materials from around the country. We've seen a little bit of that, but I know there's more that we could see. And I think it's really important, especially since we are, at least at this point, we're not considering adding focus groups or additional polling or things like that that might help us on the messaging front. And by the way, Jake, we didn't give you a chance to talk yet, but I would like to hear from you about I think we all would like to hear from you about the plans here at the foundation for messaging, especially as it might overlap with this work, or if there's places we could piggyback on what you're doing and get a little support around some help around polling or focus group work that we don't have any financing for at the current time. So I hope you'll feel free to just jump in, or do you want to, should I stop here and let you just talk for a minute? What would you like to do?
You're on a roll.
Okay, okay, I'm rolling. Jay says I'm rolling. So please feel free to jump in, okay? So we need to identify existing gaps in existing materials. As you all remember, the first round of research showed us things like we're not aware of any co-branded materials with SNAP and WIC, and we will have some dual eligible families in the state that would benefit from some co-branded materials. We have some needs around SNAP marketing materials that could be locally branded as well so that there's a trusted partner in the community, where some of our larger statewide organizations might not be seen that way. So we need to figure out pinpoint exactly all of our existing gaps, develop a list of needed assets. I have a question here about, surveying our maybe selected partners, not turning this into a huge survey effort, but if we could come up with a good list of local partners who we know would use these materials were they to have them, just really clarifying with them what exactly would you use so that we can get a nice tight list that's not overdone, but is also usable at the local level. I think we all know that where we run into challenges statewide is in making sure that we provide people assets that they can actually use, not assuming that they have a Kinko's a block away from their office and things like that. So figuring out ways to do that. And then we also need to identify what translation needs we have. As you might remember from the research, we have some Spanish language translation for some materials from our friends at Hunger Free. WIC materials are translated into what I consider a stunning number of languages, which is like 6 or 7, which obviously doesn't even begin to scratch all of the language needs we have in Colorado, but it's a lot more than we usually see. So we have that available as well through CDPHE. And then the second bucket of work I see for this is the budget. We got to figure out what that budget's going to look like, what kind of monetary requests we really are making. And that might be another place where surveying our partners could help us a little bit. Again, selected partners could help us a little bit in understanding how we best deliver it to them. You all may remember that CDPHE has this snazzy site that you can get a login to, and you can go in and order print materials there and pay for them yourself, but you can actually physically order them and have them shipped to you pretty easily. We may be able to support CDPHE. We may want to include a little bit of money for CDPHE to help them expand access to that, because I think it's a membership site, so I think they have some fences around access, and I wish Abby was here today to tell me exactly what the number is, but there are some fences. So we may want to include something in the budget to get more people access to that site so it's easier for them to get the WIC materials they need. And then, do we need a designer? We probably will. I think even if we plagiarize someone else's campaign, we'll at least probably need some Colorado-specific imagery, things that we recognize here that might not be the same in other places. So the budget piece of it is the next piece. And then the final piece I see is sort of, I'm calling this network. I'm not sure that's exactly the right word, but it's a sort of a development of a dissemination strategy. So once we have all these amazing materials and we know they're going to work for our partners, how do we get them where they need to go? And make sure they get disseminated in a way that actually gets them used, which I think is always a struggle.
I just want to chime in on that piece as well. Michelle and I have been working closely with Workgroup 5 on distribution of summer meal materials. So how might we get posters to every family resource center and every clinic and all of the schools? And so we'll get a little bit of a pilot test around how do we get that information out via email so they can just download and print very simple posters that are available, and then we can really see what that distribution looks like. And of course, we're having to do that kind of under a very tight timeline because Summer Meals launches June 8th. But it'll give us a little bit of initial information that'll help with this piece in starting that list.
So within the network, distribution plan, additional partners and networks that we could utilize that aren't here at our table right now, but that would be willing to support us. This is the place where I put some evaluation metrics. We talked a lot about this before we did the initial proposal, this idea of how we're going to create some kind of a feedback loop so we know, so that we don't end up in the position that we sometimes do, that I know never comfortable for us as communicators, where you just make things and launch them off into the abyss and never hear about them again and never know whether they were the right messages, whether they resonated, whether the people who were actually using them wish they had different, whatever, pictures, language, whatever that is. So I think it's really important that we're very thoughtful about what this feedback loop could look like, so that we're constantly iterating these materials, but iterating them in a way where we can keep getting them out, right? So that's the other struggle, is you create a distribution strategy, and then you keep iterating the materials, and then people, it can get very expensive to keep pushing them out that way. So we need to look at that issue and how we can deal with that issue. On the metrics piece, and I really would like some robust discussion around the metrics today, because I think it's absolutely critical that we nail this piece down. And I want to be clear that I think what's going to happen is that we should go ahead and propose specific ideas for how we'll get evaluation done of just this proposal. I think ultimately there will probably be an evaluation team that works on the entire blueprint and evaluates the whole effort as well. But it's unclear to me, and I think it's true, Kevin, stop me if I'm misspeaking, but I think it's true that the Governing Council hasn't quite made how that structure is going to look. So I think for the purposes of getting a very robust proposal that will answer as many of the Governing Council questions as we can, we need to build metrics into this in all of our specific proposals. But that may be a little bit of a moving target if the Governing Council decides that the evaluation is going to be run out of the blueprint as a whole. Is it, Kevin?
Sure, yeah. So we're in the process of putting together the implementation plan, and we're just waiting for Erin to start on the 20th to get her feedback as well. But I think there's two routes that they're going with evaluation. One is to hire a person to do evaluation that works in-house, and the other one is to contract with a third party to do evaluation. So around the end of June, probably early July, we should have a lot more information on that and how it's going to be handled. So.
Okay, and I'm going to ask you a question that I bet you can't answer, but I'll ask it anyway. That is, so if they hired somebody in-house or contracted with somebody, either way, would that evaluator be available to us on our individual projects, or would that be a different?
That would be the idea, yeah.
Okay, yep. Okay, great.
Can I ask a question to
Yes.
Kevin? Kevin, you mentioned implementation plan. Can you just, is that for evaluation or is that for the blueprint? Can you just give us a little bit more background?
Sure. It's for everything, actually. So it includes all the contingencies, like the individual proposals that each of these work groups are selecting. It includes the program office staff needs and stuff like that, consultants, and then also getting into things like the cost to run all these work groups and Governing Council and stuff like that. So it's kind of a mix between what do we hope to do in the next 1 to 2 years with these work groups, and then also the budget costs that are associated with them. So, okay. Yeah, of course. Thanks.
So I just want to open it up to conversation about the structure that I'm proposing. And I think, Jacqueline, to your point, you can see how we could break out into subgroups based on these buckets or other buckets that we identify based on our expertise or interest. Or we can all stay together, and I think however the subcommittees want to work will be great. But I'm just wondering, are there holes here that you see or things you think need to be thought about differently or structured differently?
Share one quick thought, just sustainability being one piece that we probably want to think through a little bit here, and maybe it's within feedback and revision, but I do think we want to pull that out as one bucket of what does sustainability look like for this campaign and for the marketing materials, and we just have to think it through. That would be my one suggestion.
Yep.
Missing bucket.
Great, good point.
And this could probably be drawn out maybe under like successful materials or like the translation needs, but just being culturally sensitive, and making sure that we're hitting those right targets, not only with the right messaging, but with the right materials.
And I think also in the distribution, to your point, because different groups will use different mediums. So I think it's the whole process.
And I just have a thought on the evaluation when you were speaking about, different reiterations of the marketing materials. And, you know, I participated in focus groups where the organizations have brought in their marketing materials and got feedback from their target audiences. So I think that would be a great suggestion before you even start to distribute, to get a focus group together and ask them what their perception is of different, you know, different materials that you have out there. And you can get some feedback ahead of time instead of, you know, like throughout.
Great. Jennifer, could you maybe address for us a little bit, is there anything that we need to add or revise here based on what's happening with Workgroup 2 and 4, Workgroup 4, the Increasing SNAP and WIC Enrollment Workgroup, in terms of, is there any input we could get from them or coordination we should do with them that could be useful in answering some of our questions?
Yeah, that's a great question. So at the last Workgroup 4 meeting, I did present the crossover work that's happening here and how that would support outreach and enrollment, especially, I think in this meeting we talked about, you know, that first level of engagement where people are aware of the program, right? So, and the message resonates with them. And then in the second step being the eligibility requirements and then the next step to enroll. So we have been talking with them about that, and a lot of stigma research has been, you know, put in both drives. You know, what are we hearing about barriers to enrollment? And of course, the number one is people don't know about the program, and then there's the rest of the ones that we know about, stigma and county process and not feeling welcome, all of those pieces. So we are sharing that information. What I will say is Workgroup 4 is a little bit behind in their strategies and proposals for how you would enroll 300,000 people in SNAP and 100,000 people in WIC. You know, so they've got a lot of work to do, and we'll see what happens behind the scenes. I mean, there is some information about how much that would cost, and believe it or not, it's not that much. I think as there is a funded project that I know we have talked about here in one of our meetings around the SNAP outreach and SNAP and WIC outreach and enrollment toolkit. And that is sort of in a limbo space right now. It's been funded for a community partner to work with unfunded partners or yet to be funded partners in how they might learn about the program, how those programs, the enrollment process, and that being really iterative. And so that feedback also telling us, you know, what is the experience happening in every community through that engagement. And what I would say is with that, these materials are going to be extremely helpful because, again, the number one issue is knowledge of the program. And so when they begin to think through where do you put resources to help enroll, so family resource centers, hospitals, community centers, spaces and places where community members are likely eligible but unaware or unsure of how to enroll, these types of materials are going to be crucial. I would also say that this group has heard from Be Heard Mile High, the Center for African American Health, and their ability to do surveys and panels. And I think that's going to be a really great asset. So that's within that outreach and enrollment project with that's currently in kind of this unknown space about who's going to be the lead agency now. But Be Heard Mile High might be one way that we could have some evaluation matrix, because they really engage the nonprofits and the consumers who can opt in and do short surveys and tell us about the experience and provide that real-time feedback. So that could be something we consider. But certainly, we're seeing a lot of cross-pollination of these work groups, which is great. We're gonna get some really great learnings from Workgroup 5 and Workgroup 4 as they begin to build their plans for outreach and enrollment. Does that help?
Yeah, I think so. I just want to make sure that we're always being mindful that there's other work groups that intersect with our work all the time and how we can make sure we're staying connected. And I didn't put it on the slide. So.
I'm interested, Jennifer, in the toolkit. Well, is that part of the blueprint that's being funded through the blueprint, or is it kind of an outside separate project?
It's actually under the blueprint, but it was one of the initial, it was funded in January, but it has yet to be launched. It's a very community-based, iterative, regional collaborative, using like the PDSA methodology, really engaging partners who are interested and willing about what they need, and how the system could be supportive in outreach and enrollment. So providing training and language. And so that it's actually been funded. Right now, Trailhead it was originally, the lead agency was Colorado Prevention Alliance in partnership with the Center for African American Health. There's some discussion about where that lands now, because CPA is in a transition period. So what agency, or could potentially the program office work with collaborative partners to really build this out?
Okay, so it's more language and need versus the material being developed.
Well, it's training, and then the material. So the whole concept of that was that the blueprint was going to provide some of these foundational resources, and that this particular project would be engaging people who are already doing this work, and especially people who have organizations and community navigators that have done some work in housing and Medicaid, and really reaching out and saying, what could you do if you have a light touch with a consumer? If you have 5 to 10 minutes, what could you do if you're doing case management? How can you maybe integrate peak? How can you talk to consumers about the next step? Where it gets a little wonky around going to the county offices and what you need and what to expect, and really supporting that piece. So it's really, from the, just the light touch all the way to a heavy case management, and what they might need to know about policy, what they'll need to, and that will be, part of using the resources that you guys have. It really is how can community-based entry points engage in this, and when they're successful, how might we fund them for, positions like we've done with Medicaid.
Okay, and I was just curious if that would inform our work on this.
Absolutely.
And so I'm seeing this more as the work we're doing, is hopefully going to be more consumer focused and family focused in a sense. And that is more training and organizational focus.
Yeah, so there were some, when we first kind of launched the blueprint there, the thinking is that there were going to be foundational resources that would then support the work on the ground. And this is the first out of the gate, and I think the most important. Because right now we do have access points that consumers can get before we build a network of community-based assisters. We can move them through the hotline. We can help train when the outreach and training toolkits are developed and that community engagement happens. There'll be places where they can get assistance. But the real goal was, how do we interface and provide some of these foundational resources? And this is a key one. This is really the one that we can get out quickly and begin to build this awareness in the spaces and places where underserved individuals can get some support in this and some knowledge about the program.
Michelle, back to your question about, I think, how do we fit with other work groups and whatnot? I think, we look at Workgroup 4 and changing how their enrollment and utilization of SNAP, and I think we could easily tie our evaluation metrics to how many people are we interfacing with, and then in the long term, maybe how could that impact Workgroup 4's worker. So I think it would be good for us to think about our evaluation metrics overlapping, because that is in the long term what our goal is. It's not just to focus on our goal, work group's goal. So just to.
Yeah, and to that end, I'm also thinking that I probably left off the slide something around what the data could and should tell us about where we start with these materials, right? We have low enrollment in both programs in Colorado, abysmally low, but we also know who's not enrolled, who could be enrolled. And so I'm wondering if that informs how we think about the list of assets and who those assets are targeted toward. I mean, we know that health and wellness language tends to work across communities, but to Jacqueline's point about cultural sensitivity, are there things that we want to really focus on based on specific communities that we know are eligible but not enrolled? And so again, kind of that's part of the metrics piece as well, right? We can help Workgroup 4 in that fashion. Is there anything else that we should talk about in terms of the structure of getting this proposal done? Any other thoughts that you have about anything about it, structure or timing. You know, we'd like to be back to the governing council, you know, my profound hope would be by September, with a pretty robust proposal at that point.
And with that, correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin or Jacqueline, but my impression is that Aaron will be in place. The governing council will have identified their needs, specific needs for the proposals, and be in a better place to provide us with more guidance. So just so you guys know as well, that's kind of how we form that timeline as well. And just something I wanted to add, Jennifer's comments made me think about us being extremely clear on what we're doing with our marketing efforts. Are we addressing just awareness, stigma, education? So just to really like hone in on what the specific needs and purpose of the marketing materials is for.
Absolutely. And I will tell you, my personal preference is that we're talking about enrollment with these marketing materials. This is about moving people from, I didn't know it was available to me, or I don't think I deserve it, or whatever the barrier has been to them, to an actual enrolled member of the program. Would be my preference for these particular marketing materials. I think it gets more complicated on the public will side, but. Jason, not to put you on the spot, but may I ask, you've heard us talk a little bit about what we're trying to shoot for here, and you've heard some good ideas about focus group work, and we have some access to Be Heard Mile High, but I'm just wondering, is there any, as you look out for the foundation plans over the horizon, is there any overlap here that we could piggyback on or take advantage of that we need to be thinking about as we're putting this together?
Sure. So I think the bigger overlap is probably with public will building. Our research efforts are focused on building public support for policy change. And one of the focus areas is building public support for safety net programs. And so I do think there will be overlap there. But in this sort of work, which is not aimed toward changing the minds of the broader public, but in fact changing the behavior of a very specific audience of folks who are eligible to be enrolled. That said, even though that's not our research, I'm hard pressed to think of any project that wouldn't be improved by research. And in this case, I think one of the things that stuck out to me is, do we know that collateral, like legitimately pieces of paper put in places where we think people go, are effective? Is that something that we know anecdotally? Is that something that we know because the rack cards are always empty? How do we know that as a method is good? And then I really liked what you said about getting, folks in the room for a focus group to make sure that the messaging that we're using is effective. So I'll stop there. I'm happy to, if there are more questions, and I think hopefully I'll have more to say in the public will building. We'll see.
Great. Yes, I'm in violent agreement with you that every project can be improved by research. I think we came to this list, the list of collateral materials largely out of a lot of research that Jennifer has done around the state in terms of what partners are asking for, and in terms of sort of what we think we need to do based on national best practices to support our assisters when they're in the field actually working one-on-one with individuals to help them walk through these conversations, and then just to also generally raise awareness about the availability of these programs to folks, and sort of demystify them and make them, try to help people get over the hump of thinking that it's too complicated, or they don't deserve it, or they don't qualify for it in some fashion. So that would be my answer to that. I don't know, Jennifer, if you want to add to that or not. But
yeah, I think those are great questions, and I would love to sit and talk with you about what I've learned. But I also think there's a lot of opportunity to use other mediums for this material, and certainly we have really strong outreach partners. We have really strong state partners. We could put this on social media, which we know most people are engaged in. Low-income folks are on, in these places, and there's a lot of reach within the organizations that are participating in the blueprint. So really using everything we can, and then kind of again seeing where that takes us. I am speaking with a few nonprofits around the country that are doing this in the next couple of weeks. And again, hopefully we'll be able to basically take their well-tested, translated, very diverse and inclusive messaging and things that have been tested with different target populations and get something out there. And I would say one of the things that I've talked to this group about and other groups is when I've been talking with folks across the state, and whether that's, Mesa County that has a really amazing planning process going on, and or family resource centers or behavioral health folks, they're all saying, okay, so how can I inform clients about this? How do we break the stigma? What resources are available? And so this is really the first step in getting what's being asked for statewide and in different sectors and different service providers and different community partners. Like, how do we approach this topic? How do we raise awareness? And so again, this isn't, I don't think, the end all of it, but it's a really, I think, easy first step that we could hammer out.
I think to that point though, like you said, flyers may not be the answer. So maybe in our research, we already have distribution plan, but that's once we've identified like what those distribution methods are. So maybe something we need to add to our research is what has been successful in these audiences that the data is showing us that we need to target, so that we're not creating, like, I think the research will show us what messaging has been effective and what modes have been effective, but like a text message is going to be very different than a flyer. So knowing that ahead of time so that we're not creating messages that are unnecessary, maybe something to add to the research.
Absolutely. Anything else on this one before we move on to public will? All right, so in terms of, again, going back to the sort of overarching structure for getting these proposals fully fleshed out and done, we're gonna put, everybody from Workgroup 1 will stay on all of the emails in terms of letting you know when meetings are happening. So if you find yourself unable to make a long-term commitment, but you do find yourself with some time in July that you're willing to give, and just wanna come to one of the meetings and work with us, then we'll make sure that you know when those are. So I just wanted to let everybody know that. We're gonna ask that you, we're gonna send out an email following this meeting to ask you to sign up specifically for subcommittee, so we know who I have to go and torture into being on a subcommittee if you didn't sign up, mostly. But you'll be getting all the emails and know when all the meetings are happening regardless. So
May I ask a quick question about that? If we have individuals who we would like to encourage to be part of that subcommittee but aren't part of this work group, are we open to doing that?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right.
Yes.
Everyone is welcome. Okay, because they might not have the backstory on what this group has been working on, but this is a very structured project to work on, so.
Absolutely. I would ask if you are going to invite folks who haven't been at our table, if you'll let us know at that ahead of time and give us a chance to onboard them a little bit, so they don't feel lost in the first meeting, and we don't have to spend an hour of our first subcommittee meeting just getting them up to speed. Either Jennifer or I or Maddie can get them onboarded in a 30-minute phone call. It doesn't have to be a huge time commitment, but I think we've just had enough experiences with folks coming and going from tables and not getting the onboarding done in the way we should, that I think that would be great, but we'd love to have, what we need at the table is expertise. So, all right, so
I just want to say, and certainly inviting folks from other work groups, like the Family Resource Center, they are doing a massive distribution on summer meals, including social media and posters to their 30 organizations. And I know TDE is going to reach out to the Food Pantry Network and see if all the food pantries will put this up. So we will have, I think, some other work group members from other, the cross-objective piece, which I think will be really helpful because there's a lot of interest in it.
all right, proposal number 2, public will. So again, can you make it go forward? Thank you. I was feeling really colorful when I made it.
Yeah, love it.
I was having a happy day.
It's like a sunset, Michelle.
There you go. I know, it's just crazy. I don't know what I was doing. It was celebrating the decriminalization of magic mushrooms. Apparently, never tried one of those, but that's just That was a fascinating outcome for me. Like, we're worried about homeless people, but we're not worried about magic mushrooms. It was interesting. The public will planning process. Again, all I was trying to do with this is just provide a very high level sort of framework for thinking about how we start working through this proposal. This one in my head is much more complicated and takes a longer time than the SNAP marketing effort, because we're starting from ground zero, and in my opinion, haven't really defined much of anything about what we're trying to do. So what I did for the big buckets is identify the high-level goal. We don't really have that. What we have said to this point is raise awareness. And all of us in this room have been through enough of these public will building campaigns to know that raise awareness is not where we need to be. But I also think that the effort to define what that high-level goal is hard. And we don't have a lot of data and information about Colorado specific to start with. So this is a place where I'd like us to have the majority of our conversation this morning, if we can, is how you all think we start down this road, because I think we need to give the subcommittee that works on this a little bit of feedback from the full group about what we'd like to see for how they start down this road, because you can see us going in a million different ways in terms, from my opinion, about what we're actually trying to do here with this will building effort. So anyway, to stick a pin in it for just a second, identifying that high-level goal, develop the needs. Again, these are very simplistic buckets, right? What kind of resources do we need to do this? That helps us with identifying the budget, right? We all know that this is going to be a multi-phase effort, that there'll be some money up front that we'll need to spend to get the creative and marketing done, and then a second tranche of money that will need to come in to basically execute the creative and marketing that we identify in real simplistic terms. And then finally, we're going to have to put together some kind of a fundraising plan. It is, I think, and Maddie, please chime in here because you sat with the governing council and I did not, but I do not believe that we are just going to go to the governing council and say, write us a $3 million check and they're going to do it. So I think we're going to have to show them a fundraising plan that brings together some additional partners to the table to work in partnership, whether that's in kind from some partners and actual donations from others, but this is going to need to be a thoughtful fundraising plan, and not just a, Santa Claus is going to give us the money.
No, that's exactly right. And I think the bigger thing is making sure we have other partners committing their time and energy and efforts, because we know that's going to lead to a more sustainable long-term effort as well. So.
Okay, so with that and acknowledging that my little buckets are very high level and very simplistic, I want to go back to the first one and just have a little conversation around that, which is the high level goal. That, having sat through a lot of, many of the meetings that wrote that high level goal in terms of the actual drafting of the blueprint, there was never any detailed discussion about what that meant. Public will around hunger. And so I believe that for the purposes of our work, that field is relatively wide open. But what are your thoughts on how we get to that goal? I do believe, given that this public will effort will underpin every other thing that the blueprint does, it is important that we get it right and that we have clarity around how we got to that recommendation, because it's going to get questioned. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean it's going to rightfully get questioned, and it should get questioned. So just want to kind of lay that on the table for everybody to just sort of chime in about what your thinking is on how we might get there, so that we can at least deliver that to the subcommittee that's going to work on this, about just what we think.
Sorry to jump in as like the new kid in the room. So kick me out if you feel so moved. So when I think about this high-level goal, the questions that come to mind for me are we trying to change like minds and perspectives, or change behavior? And maybe the easiest way to conceptualize that is, like, say you're driving north on 25 and you're seeing a billboard, and you might see a billboard that says, "Don't bring your pot outside of your home." Am I the only one who's seen those? Right,
No,
this
no.
like behavior
No, always talk
campaign.
about it.
Yeah,
Yep.
egg the bartender.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
You would think I take a lot of drugs, because I know about mushrooms and pot. I don't, actually. I don't.
So I would say, right, that is to raise awareness in order to change behavior, versus like the no on 112 ballot measure billboard that is trying to change your mind to say, like, no, don't support this thing. So that's right, trying to change somebody's mind versus trying to change somebody's behavior. And in this case, because I don't know ultimately what public will helps us accomplish in this space, I can't answer those, but I'm hoping that you all have some thoughts.
I think we're going to have to continue to flesh that out. One of the things that has been interesting, and again, talking with folks for a couple of years now about the blueprint, is just the complete lack of awareness of the scale of hunger in Colorado. And, you know, when we visit other states where there's, like when I go to New York, or almost any other state, you'll see like 1 in 7 kids are hungry, or 1 in 4, and those the visuals, and we just haven't elevated the issue. And I'm not 100% sure about like how Medicaid messaged the extent and impact of lack of healthcare access. And I know that it was much easier with kids, the CHIP and Medicaid expansion. In the research, we will be talking with No Kid Hungry and Share Our Strength and Feeding America about, so I think the first part of it is public education. So how do we even raise the awareness? Because people are really shocked. People who even work in health and human services weren't aware of this. I think that was one of the biggest impacts of the blueprint, is when you hear it, you're like, wow, how is this happening in our state or in our county, and especially in counties that have really high childhood hunger, and which is pretty, easily accessible. So I think we really need to have experts in the room like you and all of the folks in here to say, do we start with public education? What are we trying to accomplish? And for me, I think the minute people understand that it's so extensive here and that there are people working on it, and maybe we can engage them in the solutions, like that's my hope. But I'm sure there are other folks in the room who have, like the next step. And I certainly hope that the folks that I'm able to talk to nationally can help us. And I would invite, a small group to hear about what I find out, or even a full group. But to me, when I've done this work across the state, it's just shocking to decision makers, to health and human services folks, to suicide prevention commissions, to kind of everybody. And then they want to do something. And so then we do have to have the what can you do? So, I don't know how we strike that balance between, okay, now people know, so then what do we do? So I think we have to really think that through. So how do we funnel that shock and awe, and I hate that word, shock, and energy to go into this? Yeah.
Off of Jace's point, I think the other big thing that I struggle with on this priority is really just the target audience. We can, if it's too wide, I think it dilutes a little bit of that next step action that we want to see happen with it. So one of the upcoming challenges for this group and this subcommittee will really be to narrow down that target audience. Who do we see, not only from the objective piece, and are we changing awareness or behavior, or we also need to think through, who are we really trying to target? Is it the organizations and policymakers, or is it just the general population? I don't know.
Yeah, and what's the call to action? Right, I go back, sorry to keep talking about this billboard that I see every day, but if you're First Bank, all you need to do is build brand awareness, and so you're going to just put your name out there, right? But that's not who we are, right? Like, we don't have that sort of resource. And so what the call to action that we have to make, and I think to your point, you're sort of saying like, there's no clear answer to that right now. Like, we know that there's a lack of awareness, and that when we resolve that lack of awareness, there's some energy, and it's like, well, what do we do with that energy?
Right, absolutely. And I don't think that was ever defined in the blueprint, what the call to action should be. Though I wonder if the goals and priorities of the blueprint could help us define that to some degree.
Okay, and I was just thinking of, can see your name, Max?
Yeah, yes, sorry.
Yes. You know, just based on what you said, maybe the call of action can be defined once we figure out who our target audience is. You know, because if your target audience is policymakers, then we need a policy. If your target audience is a bank, we need your money, you know, to help. If your target audience is community organizations, you know, I could see, okay, do we need more urban farming? So, you know, it's defining that target audience to get to the action that's needed.
Yeah, I mean, by now a few people have spoken, so I just want to co-sign the concept of really refining who we're trying to change and move, because something that we've talked about, or at least a couple of us that are part of this group, outside of the actual meetings, is if you're hungry, it's not the case that you haven't looked for where to not be hungry and not try to find resources. So I'm hesitant to think that our target audience and building public will would be hey, if you're hungry, this is you're hungry, to re-echo things that people are already experiencing. But to really move systems is something that I'm really interested in. And so, for example, on our area campus, they said, okay, we don't have a say at all in what our money is spent on. And in Denver and at the state level, we spend a tremendous amount on the concept of safety, where I think a lot of people, particularly in my community, would argue that the things that we fund with safety budgets do not actually entail safety for us. And so how can we shape food insecurity as a component of safety and then alter systems to be able to fund that? And so, as I mentioned with their area campus thing, they said we don't have a role in what we pay for with our tuition. So they were able to convince the campus to say, here's $30,000, you as students decide. And with that money, they decided, let's have a campus kitchen where we're reclaiming food that's unused to be able to distribute to folks that are experiencing hunger. So my interest is in that, but I would think that at least this is creating a broader thing, but I think there's a lot of branches that we could create off of that, including how to change systems, but then also how to get access to folks who need it. So I don't know, I'm really interested in how we actually refine that audience and what a message we're actually putting out there.
Yeah. Let me ask your thoughts on so we all agree that we don't have an audience that we know, right? And we don't have a call to action necessarily. What is your thinking on how we could get to that? Do we need focus groups? Do we need, I don't want to, I don't think that focus groups and polling is constantly the answer, but I do think that in this particular space, we are a bit adrift in terms of, we know that people's awareness, this is the general public's awareness, not people who are experiencing hunger, but the general public's awareness, people who are not experiencing hunger, do not understand the scale and scope of hunger in the state of Colorado, and are not engaged in the issue generally in the way that we would like them to be. But we don't have an answer to either side of the equation from where I sit, right? We don't know that we want moms to take their kids outdoors or dads to take their kids outdoors. We don't have the GoCo, right? We don't have the Generation Wild call to action, which is get your butt out there and hike your kid around the mountains, or get out there and have them play in a playground, right? We don't have that piece of it, and we also we don't have the backside piece necessarily either, which is sort of what created that call to action. So I'm interested in this group's thinking on what do we want to see the subcommittee do to start to define that, because eventually we're going to have to get to Jace's point, everyone's point, which is, this is the audience we're trying to talk to, and this is what we want them to do. And I do believe that we are, if you look across the blueprints, goals, and strategies, like we just talked about the SNAP marketing, I do believe we are targeting communities experiencing hunger in a different sort of way, right? We have plans for how we're going to help them move toward better food security, through enrollment in SNAP and WIC and through some of the other efforts that are going on in Workgroup 2 and 3. So I think we can acknowledge up front that this is a larger public engagement around the issue of hunger. But what is that larger public engagement? Is it tell your lawmaker to get themselves down to the state capitol building and solve this problem? Is it turn more inward to your own community and do these 4 things in your own community? I mean, I think we have there's a broad landscape here we can wander around on, but we've got to get clarity on that landscape. And I'm just interested in your thoughts on how you think we should get that clarity.
Can I make a suggestion?
Please.
I think that this is something that I think we would do well to be informed by some of the other work groups on. I mean, maybe this is an ask that we need to make to them. Have somebody from this group or from one of the subgroups go to the Workgroup 2-3 meeting or go to the Workgroup 4 meeting and ask them, if we do this outreach, where do we need to be driving people? Where do we need to be focusing energy? I think that would help in the collaboration between the work groups and in terms of cohesion for the blueprint as a whole.
That's a fair point.
I like the way you're thinking, Andrew. I wonder if we could sketch out some possibilities, and then, bring kind of some ideas that are generated from this group, so it's has a little more frame or cohesion around our thinking, because they haven't sort of been through some of the work that we've been doing. But if we can bring some options and help them inform the options, and we have the rationale and some of the interconnectedness, because I think, when we think about, okay, what would increasing the knowledge of hunger do, if we can drive them to the blueprint, and that we could have a link, are you in a school district, or are you a parent, or are you a concerned citizen? And then, we could link them to actionable items. But I think the work group would have to kind of think through, is that one option, or, what are the national organizations going to tell us? And then we can bring them something to react to that are a little more refined, rather than hey, what would you think you need? Because they're really still informing their own ideas about their specific goals. But I do think that that's a really important next step, maybe after we have some ideas generated.
Yeah, I feel like we need to figure out what's going to make a difference. Public education to what end? Talking to people for what? And what actually makes change? And that does seem like a place where the other work groups would have something to say, but I often think that it's easier to give somebody something to react to than to ask them to create. So I think for me, I'm just trying to understand, like, as someone really new to this work, what does a member of the public do to make a difference? It's like if I was working on climate change, I would say, take a shorter shower or whatever. I made that up. I don't know if that helps. So like, what does somebody do on this issue to make a difference?
And I think that's a great question. And I think, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Do you want to go ahead?
I just wanted to offer an example of something that's happening in my neighborhood with the Colfax Neighborhood Association. And when we talked about, Vinny was mentioning, what can you do in your own neighborhood, is that, the association came together and said, we see a lot of hungry people in our neighborhood, and we want to establish a food bank. And that's what they did. They established a food bank on a Friday where neighbors can come, and they ask for donations, and that's something immediate that could happen. And so when you talk about immediate impact, and my question is, are we looking for immediate impact? Or maybe we should, or long-term impact. If we're looking for immediate impact, we can go to city council, we can go to neighborhood associations, we could say, hey, if this is something that you can do and you've never thought about in your neighborhood, would you consider coming together and establishing food banks for your neighborhood? And that's something immediately that people could do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the kind of building off of that good point, one of the challenges that I think we have when we look across the totality of the blueprint is that we have both locally based solutions, and then we have the systems change solutions, right? So the question becomes, is there something we could build that would support both of those things, or do we need to pick a horse here, right? Because the reality is solving, the overarching solution is both, right?
Yeah.
Is both. And can we do something with a public will campaign that does both? Or do we need to say, our goal is going to be to educate the public to a point where they press on their local officials to make hunger a solution at the county commissioner level, at the state capitol, or is it an either or is it a yes and? And I don't know the answer to that question, but I'll put that to you, because the blueprint doesn't give us guidance insofar as it doesn't pick a horse. The blueprint says we've got to do all of these things, and in the blueprint is right in saying that we've got to do all of these things, but it doesn't give us clarity on the public will piece, I think, because of that.
So I completely agree, but I also think some of the conversations that Jennifer's talking about, talking to the national partners, so we have our overarching goals to end hunger. Like, what are those footholds that we need to get there? So maybe it's like addressing childhood hunger first, and then you step here, and then you step there. So I figure, like, because it seems so overwhelming, and I mean, we could pick 1,000 different audiences, and we could pick 1,000 different calls to action, but what are some of those really strong footholds that we need to have in place? And then working back from those, like, do we need, to your point about childhood insurance, like maybe that is like a good place to even explore, start those conversations. Like, where do we start with those footholds, and then how does that ladder up to the ultimate goal? So it becomes more manageable and more like, okay, we can start thinking and processing it through.
I agree, and I actually think given the progress that we've made and how national organizations are looking at Colorado, No Kid Hungry might come in with their marketing campaign, and we'll see all of these. So it might be that we actually get a lot of help on this and where we put them, right? So I think we have to kind of see what all of our assets are too, and pick a horse. But I also think that there are some partners who could come in, and maybe we could co-brand, and so that they would get to see actionable items in Colorado. But I don't think we're actually far away from other resources coming in that have done this. But then the question still remains, now that we have some footholds, we have the public education, what are we going to do with it? And certainly childhood hunger is much more understandable for people. And with every child that we end hunger with our families, the parent or parents get enrolled in these programs as well. So there's a lot we need to talk about for sure, a lot we need to get advice on. Yeah.
Michelle, I heard you talking about policy solutions.
Yeah.
And I think that's a particularly interesting route to consider, because that's systemic, it's naturally statewide, and it gives a to what end to this awareness, because we need public support and mobilization to move policy. Do you have a sense of what policy, have there been policies that have been talked about that the Blueprint groups are really interested in pushing for?
Yes. I think the blueprint itself outlines some policy changes. Some of them have one of them has already occurred. For example, the blueprint outlines a sort of a change in the FPL percentage for enrollment in these programs. So we've already moved a little bit of policy. I don't know that we've had the conversations at the uppermost levels to say these are the policies that specific policies that we're going to push, but we, because we need to be engaged, for example, on the Capitol, at the Capitol this year, they ended sort of the lunch issue for all the way to K-12. Wonderful, very exciting. We did not engage on that issue. We should have, but we weren't in a position leadership-wise to do so. So I think we could define that. I think that's definable. And I think Jennifer could probably give you a list of 400 policies in her head right now that she would say we need to do, but that's absolutely a starting place for us if we decide that's where we want to go, is we're going to focus on these 3 policies. I think underneath that, if we did the sort of awareness piece, underneath that, we could show people lots of other things they can do at the community level, from suggesting how you, a quick little toolkit for how you start a food bank in your own neighborhood if you feel like that's an issue. You know, I have a personal passion, and you guys have heard the story too many times, but I have a personal passion around the school lunch issue and what you can do at your individual little elementary school to wipe out lunch debt for families who can't afford lunch debt. Happened in my little elementary school this year completely organically because of the interest of one mom, not me, but another mom who did it. And now we have a surplus of money sitting there for our families who need it. So I think there are little things we could show them like that, but on the big P policy level, there are certainly things that the blueprint defines at both the city and county level, at the state level. I know our state partners could use support when they are going to do things at the Capitol building that we could help. So I'll shut up there. But yes, I think we have some policy ideas that we could start with, and we could add to that.
I think also there, you know, if we look at what's happened with housing and homelessness, so they've raised the issue around affordable housing and homelessness in the hopes that they can achieve a general fund allocation, especially with Governor Polis' commitment to the blueprint now and to save people money on health care. I think next legislative session, if we have more information from some polling or even building on Hunger Free Colorado's upcoming polling. I don't know if there's an opportunity to add questions to that, so that might be something we could explore with you guys. Getting an allocation ongoing. I know that Governor Hickenlooper provided SNAP outreach funding match after the Health Foundation's initial year. But when we look at the healthcare cost savings potential of ending hunger, and we have some public will building, I think that would be the next ask, you know, and that's certainly something we need to be mindful of in the future. And it's interesting because I live in a community where when I open the paper, probably 4 days a week, there's a topic of homelessness and affordable housing, and yet there are 600 people point in time homeless in my community and 41,000 people who are hungry. That to me is, we haven't raised the issue. And then if that can cascade, local dollars will go to that. Potentially TANF reserve dollars would go to that. Potentially state general fund would go to that. But without the proliferation and acknowledgement that hunger is an issue, we won't get there. So I think, like, you know, we need to think long-term. This is sort of a short-term, it's a short-term, midterm, long-term thing that we're thinking about with public and political will, but that will, I think, support us in the next legislative session. And then I think we need to have all the smartest people in the room thinking about what's the next ask and what's the big ask. For $6 million, we could enroll 10% more people in SNAP a year and reach our 90% participation rate in 5 years. But we need that money, right? And same thing with food deserts and food distribution and child nutrition programs to really move us into the top 10. So I think they're quantifiable, but if no one cares or no one knows, I don't know how we get traction, right?
Jace, is there anything you have that's on the near-term horizon in the research field that could help us with, if this work group decided that policy, that the call to action is going to be some kind of a policy call to action, it sounds like you would need that piece. But if that were the case, is there anything you have on the near term that could help us define this better or think about it more fully?
Hard to say. Let me tell you a little bit about how we're approaching it. We've just brought on some folks who have been involved in a number of social change efforts. Marriage for same-sex couples is one of them. So we are going through a 5-phase process. The first is the change phase, that is to understand the change we want to make in the world. The second is a landscape phase to understand how are people talking about these issues, how is the media covering these issues, to your point, Jennifer, where is the awareness, where are the gaps? Next is a mindset phase. Where are Coloradans, where are their heads, and not just like, I'm going to ask you a 12-minute poll and you're going to tell me if you support or oppose something. It's in-depth mindset research where we do in-depth interviews, where we spend an hour and a half with a person interviewing them, focus groups, journaling, where people might journal over a period of 4 or 5 days and be asked deepening questions to really get into the mindsets and understand how psychology is influencing people around these issues. And then the fourth phase is persuasion. How do we move them through the conflict that they might feel about these issues in order to persuade them to do the things we want them to do or think the way we want them to do? And the fifth phase is action. How do we put what we learned into action? How do we test it in the field? How do we put things out there? So that might sound like it takes a long time, and it does. And also we're looking at issues like the broad issue of health equity, affordable housing, behavioral health and substance use, and safety net programs. So getting to all of those and what order is still to be determined, but this is definitely a multi-year commitment for us. What I do think could be helpful is in early days, we're going to be digging into people's perspectives about low-income people. I might argue, if I was being cynical, that the reason that affordable housing landed with the kind of attention that it has gained is because white middle-class people started talking about affordable housing. And so we really need to understand how Coloradans think about low-income people and the challenges that low-income people experience. And I think that could be helpful here. If we learn that people, how they associate hunger and with whom they associate hunger, and we know, for example, that folks assume that all homeless people are addicts. And so what do people assume about folks who are hungry or about people who are living on lower incomes? That could be informative for our work, for sure. That is the earliest that I think, like the earliest learning that I think we would get that is for this work, and that's still probably in early 2020. Sorry for the long rant. I hope it was helpful. Somebody asked me to talk about that.
I'll take credit.
Great. Other ideas for how we might get to?
How do we get hunger on the top of your list, James?
Yeah.
Hard to say.
So James doesn't leave today until he gets hungry.
Commitment.
So.
I think one thing, back to looking at other work groups, is there's been a lot of work done on the blueprint already. So looking at some of the priorities of the other groups and understanding what work needs to be done to change behavior or change mindset so that that work can be done. And obviously that's still a really big perspective, but I think it could help us narrow down at least some of the priority areas, so that might help.
So what does that look like when you say look at?
Yeah, so I think looking at
additional meeting, or is that?
I think that's partially looking at what are the goals from each work group and kind of you guys are experts in it, but I know I'm not, and understanding kind of where do these fall? Do they all fall? Do a lot of them fall into policy? Do a lot of them fall into direct community change? Do a lot of them fall into systemic organizational change? Can we bucket them and then better understand? I'm not exactly sure, but that's what comes to mind at first for me.
And so what I was asking is, how do we get that information? When you're saying we need to look at that, what does that look like for us? How are we going to have a meeting to discuss that? Is that something that's going to be sent to us via email?
I was going to say, I think it's already outlined in terms of the tangible, there's like a spreadsheet to make it at the very basic, but I think there's a lot more detail and depth that these guys could give us a little more perspective into. The chairs could give us more perspective, but I would love to hear your thoughts, Jennifer, about that.
So I think one of the best things that we can do initially is maybe go back and do a crosswalk with the blueprint, right? So that's our kind of syllabus. That's that's what people are kind of following and prioritizing in the work groups. again, the wonderful thing about Workgroup 1 and Workgroup 5 is they're out ahead on some short-term goals, and some things have been funded in those areas to move the needle on really defined specific goals in the blueprint. Workgroup 2 and 3 is really trying to flesh it out. It's a very complicated work group. There's a lot in there, and also trying to map out what work is already happening in the community that's being led by organizations like the Colorado Food System Council, which is really around agricultural and distribution, and what that could actually take off the plate of the blueprint. 2 and 3, I think, is going to take a while to really fine tune what they're going to try to do short-term, mid-term, long-term. Certainly, you know, work group 4 and 5, 4 I think is going to be, have some actionable items in the next couple of months. And then I'm certainly willing to help support work group 1 by providing that crosswalk, if that's something you would like, and to try to make it easier to understand the connections. So, you know, if that would be something that's helpful, let me know. And I can actually put together a document, so it's not going to take too much time away from this. It's really, how do you want that information? And certainly even just looking at the blueprint and how what we're going to learn from each of those strategies and how it might impact and actually support one another. I don't think that's been done because we've really just been trying to, I think, onboard and understand the potential possibilities in each group. So if those are 2 things that you would like, I'm, you know, just like, you can ask, you know, and so it's really sort of what would be helpful.
It seems like if we had a clear understanding of the policies that are implicated by each work group, that might make it easier for us to then go to the work group and say, you know, is this right? And we see an intersection. I think if we get the clarity in the policies for each work group, it might show us where that intersection is, that we could start to propose some public will efforts around that are clear, right? You know, to Jace's point, what do you want them to do? What do we need to do at the local level, at the state level, and where are those intersections that we could create some will building around by raising people's awareness, first of all, that there's a hunger issue, and then second of all, what they should do to help. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. I'd like to do that, yeah.
Great, okay. So we're gonna then ask Jennifer to put some of that research, those pieces together for us in a way that is easy for us to understand. I don't understand, I will be honest, you know, I've been around it a long time and I don't understand all the policy intricacies that our friends at CDPHE and CDE and others understand.
And I think to the point of target audience, Jennifer, maybe if you could help us to better understand what those policies, like, here's the policy and a little bit about each. So what's the target audience we would need to change or we need to educate so that it can help us frame that as well. It's not just going to be lawmakers, right? It's going to need to be the supporters under those. So maybe that would help integrate those 2 aspects.
Yep.
Yep. Yeah, I can work on that between now and our next meeting.
Great. I'm curious from you guys, and looking at the process, we obviously are very much on the identifying high-level goal. Are there other things we need to support the subcommittee in terms of making next steps besides the spreadsheet? Sorry, it's more than that. The document that Jennifer's going to put together that would help us or help that group to better understand next steps.
I guess I'm just kind of curious from the work group, is there anyone who really doesn't want to be on both of these work groups? I mean, these subcommittees, I guess, they're both integrated into the purpose of why we decided and we're sitting on this in work group 1. And so, and I don't even know what our next step vision would be for this work group once we've accomplished these things. So maybe we have some definition. I'm wondering if the first one, the marketing materials, if it's easily accomplishable, if we delve into that as a team, knock it out, if we can actually accomplish it in a month, like we had kind of suggested, do that as a first step while we're kind of doing this research piece, trying to figure out maybe the scope of what the campaign might be. Just a thought for the group.
That makes good sense to me. I don't know, I think we can't really answer that question till we get feedback in what subcommittees people want to be on. I think we can acknowledge that we're kind of small today. Usually we have a lot more folks in the room than this, so I'd like to reach out to the full work group and, with just at least a paragraph description on what we're asking them to sign up for, and then I think that question can be answered. But if everybody wants to do both work groups, or both subcommittees, then we might as well just stay as a work group and knock out the SNAP first. SNAP WIC. SNAP WIC, but not too much WIC because we got a lot of WIC. One of the pieces that we haven't talked about yet this morning that I'd like to put out to the work group for your help and support is the fundraising piece. I think, with all due respect to the amazing talents and skills that we have in the room that I don't know anything about because we don't really discuss them, I feel the least able to put together a comprehensive fundraising strategy for this. I have some ideas, but this is not my expertise, the fundraising piece, and I don't know if there are folks sitting in this room who have people in their orbit. If you personally are feeling like I do, which is like, this is my least competent area of all the ones that we're talking about, do you have folks in your orbit who we could get to the table to help us just with the fundraising piece? Good development folks who know how to get from point A to point B on these things. I'd like to at least make a call for that.
And I just want to piggyback on that for clarification too, is that the intent is not to compete with current funders for current organizations, right? So, we don't want to take away, right, or compete. So what might be like non-traditional corporate sponsors, or, how do we put our intelligence together, maybe get some national funding, but not taking away or duplicating what organizations need to do for their general operating and their program support.
And also not anticipating that the blueprint, current funders of the blueprint will fund this entire effort, because that's not, I don't believe that's on the table at all. And nor should it be, right? I mean, this is an opportunity to bring in some funders who I think could stay engaged with us across other areas of the blueprint. So getting people excited, if we put together a good public will campaign, this is one where people can get enthusiastic about it, right? Because they're going to have statewide reach, and this is kind of some of the fun stuff, right? It's not the weedier figuring out how to jigger around with federal policy and make things work better, or how to put a grocery store in La Junta, right? I mean, this is a different kind of place where we could engage funders who might stay with us then, and stay with us over the long haul in the weedier areas as well. So, but I do feel like, at least for me, this is the place where I feel least competent to help. And so if we can get folks from your networks or organizations, I'll just put out the call for that, and you all can decide what is realistic for you and what's not realistic for you. But that's a place where I feel like we have a gap in our expertise at the table. Again, if this is if this is like your most amazing area of expertise, I apologize for not knowing that.
Do we have them just connect directly with you, or you want them to come to a meeting? Or?
Yes, and I think we'll have them go through Kevin, because he's the point of all. Yes, please. But I would love for them to connect, and I would love for them to come to the table. And we can also, if they have limited time to give, we can also try to carve out a way in which we can extract their expertise and bring it to the table for you all. We could figure that out too. Like if they're they don't have hours and hours to sit with us and talk, but they're willing to give us, a little bit of their research thinking and a little bit of their time on the phone to kind of extract that research out of them and give it to the group. We could also make it work that way. I don't care how we structure it. I just want to find a way to get the knowledge. All right. Maddie, you want to?
Yeah, so I think the last thing we wanted to put out there is something we haven't talked a lot about, but I wanted Jennifer to speak briefly about. Another need that potentially could help us in terms of kind of a low-hanging fruit are the development of fact sheets that help people to start understanding about hunger a little bit more. And so I'd love you to give us a little background and thoughts on the effort.
Yeah, so Michelle and I have talked extensively, and one of the things that we talked about in the steering committee as well, and then a lot of what I heard around the state were people really wanting to understand how hunger impacts their particular work. So I presented to like early childhood councils, and that will have like principals and CCAP providers, and they want to know more specifically how hunger impacts early childhood development and attachment and behavior. Schools and PTA want to understand the impacts on graduation rates and school performance and test scores. And some of that is in the blueprint. There's some new research. What this wouldn't be is a research document with footnotes. I mean, we can have the footnotes on the website, but really people have wanted to know, if I want to talk about this with my network, what information could you give me? And that has been a repeated request. And so Michelle and I have talked about creating some really simplified fact sheets that would be sector specific. So I get a lot of emails, people saying, what was that rate of suicide with teenagers who are hungry, or behavioral health asking, how do I bring this up in my leadership group or within my organization? And so these would be designed for people who are already engaged or are just learning about it, to really talk about the relevance and how that impacts their sector and their sphere. And so we were talking about seniors, early childhood, school districts, criminal justice. So Erin and I were presenting to a national Safe States Alliance, and we did just quick research, and 1% increase in food insecurity results in a 12% increase in crime. Blew me away, right? So criminal justice has not been engaged, but they are so engaged in policy, and there's so many intersections with our work. So being able to provide that to folks that are interested in reducing recidivism, the veteran hunger. So really, we have a list of about 8 or 9 that we could put together, and then at the bottom we could put, how to learn more, how to get engaged, the work group piece, how to, what we can do as a blueprint as a whole. But making those available for folks who want to talk about this, and to make it easy for them to talk about it in their networks. So one of the things is to really say, is that something this group supports, so that we can move forward on that? Would you like a list, or would you like to contribute? Do you want a list of what we're thinking and then provide more? Do you think this isn't necessary? We're just trying to think of things that we can do that are within, the blueprint marketing, where folks can be able to provide that. So that's kind of the thinking that we've been putting together over time.
Great, thank you. I would love your guys' thoughts on...
And housing and homelessness was on the list.
Yeah, that's a big one. I would love your guys' thoughts on the ideas, or either support or questions or feedback on creating these fact sheets, and if you think they'd be beneficial or whatnot. Sounds like there's an ask, but I just want to get your guys' thoughts on it as well.
Yes, I think it'd be a great idea. I also want to mention, in the realm of criminal justice, and I could forward this to Kevin, but a good group to include would be CCJRC around the funding component as well. They've created a ton of money around justice reinvestment. So yes, I agree with that sheet. Yeah.
Thank you. Who do you work with, Justin, or straight with Christy?
Probably Christy, because she does the justice reinvestment stuff, but Justin's always great.
Yes, they're amazing. Yeah, thanks.
I like the fact sheet, and I just wanted to mention that you had said specific actions. I think those are critical. Any sort of telling someone about what's happening, there needs to be a very specific ask. Even if you're someone who is delving into and has a little bit of background around hunger, it's very easy to get overwhelmed. You find out it's a big issue, and then you immediately just pull back. Well, there's nothing I can do. But if we can detail out, go to this place, or donate here, or support this legislation, that just immediately gives them, passes the overwhelming phase and goes, okay, I'm going to do something about this.
I agree. One of the things that I don't know if the blueprint wants to take on, or you know, if another advocacy organization wants to take on. When the legislative session started, we were just a little behind. And one of the things that I think we can do is fact sheets by congressional district or Senate district. That could be something we do. It could be something that's on the website. It could be something that Hunger Free does if there was funding. But some of those really local, if we want to influence policymakers, Center on Budget and Policy Priorities puts together a U.S. congressional breakout, which I think is really cool, but it doesn't say like what representative at the state level you could call. So that's another thing just to, you know, put on our public education radar screen that would be interesting as well.
And this might sound regulatory in thought, and I want to throw it out there. I think fact sheets are great. How would the approval process, or how would those get vetted to make sure that everyone was on board with what's in the fact sheets?
Good question. We aim to be consensus driven within the work groups, definitely. So I think they would probably be presented to us first, but I think in terms of data management and making sure everything was accurate, that's a good question, because I think we would aim to have objective data by far, but some of it could be subjective. So I would love your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I think what I don't want to do is overdo it, right, as you were saying, and overwhelm people. But so everything that I put out or wrote in the blueprint was cited. So there's this huge one pager with like six font or something. But making sure that it's accurate would be something I will definitely, you know, do. But this group really, you know, I would want you guys to look at it and say, you know what, there's a data point that's come up in my work, and could you find it? Or this one doesn't resonate, have you thought about this? So certainly this group would be the group to look at it before, like when it's in rough design, right? And then we can, you know, tweak and improve it as needed.
Yeah, what we've done in the past is sort of the kind of group vetting process where we'd bring it here and we'd give it to everyone here, and then you share it with whatever appropriate network you have that would need to look at different pieces of data or make sure that we've accurately presented the data. And that has worked pretty well for us in the past, but open to other ideas too.
I know in the last month, I've created personally 2 fact sheets, one that we gave to the Lieutenant Governor on, it had childhood and senior hunger, and then another one just on senior hunger that I can pass on to you guys to look at too. So.
Great, thank you.
That's awesome, and yeah, maybe
Yeah,
there's some out there already that we can utilize. And from a very logistical standpoint, we've been using Google Docs and Google Drive, so I mean, everything, not that we all go there every day, but I think the idea is that we're going to be more engaged in that, and I think the more we can utilize it to have discussions, that way this time is really well utilized as our one-time monthly instead of having to repeat everything. So, but I think to your point of like, what are those fact sheets that are already out there, and how can we start using those so that Jennifer can make sure to be using the most up-to-date and relevant information possible to create those.
I just have a clarifying question, Jennifer, because you mentioned that fact sheets and developing them and giving them to people so they can see how it affects their work. So are you saying that there's separate fact sheets for these? Because you mentioned graduation rate, childhood development, you know, seniors, veteran. Are you having all of these facts on one sheet?
You know, I think it would be great to have a high-level fact sheet that's just driven from blueprint data that's just hunger in Colorado. And then having specific ones, so that we can actually engage more stakeholders into this process. For instance, I presented to the Suicide Prevention Commission, and they just had no idea about the impact of hunger on suicide and hunger on mental health. And from that came many more requests to present. What this could help do is for those people who are interested in integrating it into their systems or into their networks, they would be individualized so that folks could see the impacts. But of course, at the top, we'll have, 1 in 11 Coloradans are hungry, 1 in 7 kids, that high level piece, and then the sector specific, population specific. To Vincent's point, we haven't really engaged with criminal justice because we haven't been able to, so it's just so huge. So how can we make this issue relevant? There's a lot of CCAP providers that, are very concerned about Medicaid and concerned that their kiddos have care coverage, and the well child visits, but they might not know the impacts of hunger and then potential action items that they could do. So it's really bringing in new stakeholders or people who are already engaged but don't have that thing in their hand.
Right, yeah, but my question is that thing in their hand going to be topic specific?
Yes.
So is it going to be, you're going to have stats just on depression, and that's just one fact sheet. The other fact sheet might address veterans. The other fact sheet, okay.
Yeah, yeah. What do you think of that?
I like that. Especially if you're talking about you're targeting a specific audience, and so the stats are based on veterans only.
Yes.
When you start talking about having all 9 of these on one sheet.
Right. No, then they have to read the whole blueprint.
Yeah, that's a book.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And just for everyone's edification, because you probably don't spend a lot of time wandering around the Blueprint website, but though these many years ago now, we have resources on the website that include a rollover map so you can see by county what SNAP and WIC enrollment looks like, as well as the eligible but not enrolled populations for those programs. We also have a county by county fact sheet that just says if you want to know what hunger looks like in Boulder, here it is, Boulder County, here it is, or Mesa County or Denver County, whatever. So you get those numbers as well. And then I will also tell you that we are in very deep need of embarking on a data update project for the website. The numbers move on us annually. And so I have personally requested through some communications planning that I've been trying to do to help get Aaron onboarded, as well as the governing council, thinking through some policies we're going to need about like what data do we use, because you all know that data is tough when it comes to whose data is right and whose data is not. And so I would love to engage some of the expertise at this table around how we get that policy in place so that when it's time to update the data, we know what data we're using and we can get it done in a sort of a clear fashion. Because right now our data on the website, really basic stuff, says 1 in 6 kids, and we know that number has moved. So that's also a priority for me, to just make sure that our website is always current and using the best data available.
Thank you, everyone, for amazing discussion and feedback and whatnot. I know there are a few next steps. It's 11:53, and there is a meeting coming in right after this, so I just want to be thoughtful of that. So as our next steps, we'll make sure to send out these minutes, and I think we'll make sure to invite other work groups to our subcommittees as well. Depending on feedback, we'll either have an entire work group meeting or subcommittee specific. I would ask that you keep your June 14th meeting on your calendar in case we utilize that time. Something to think about for the longer term, maybe starting in 2020, is that we are looking for a new location for these meetings, potentially something that holds, around 20 people, has AV, conference, video ability if possible, parking, and it's preferably free, but if...
I would also clean my house.
Yes!
You're asking for all of those
Mine
things.
too.
I'd like to get my house.
Mine too. And, lots of other things. But if you could keep that in mind, and if you have a space in mind, if you could please let Kevin know, that would be awesome. We will be meeting here for the next few meetings, but just something to keep on your docket in your brain. So thank you again. We will be in touch soon, and hope you all have a great day. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, did you want to mention something?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. We have one more thing.
Yes, there's an event coming up that I just wanted to talk about that seems relevant to this group. Does anybody know the group Warm Cookies of the Revolution?
What is it?
Warm Cookies of the Revolution?
No, it's not. Oh, I've heard of it.
Okay, yeah, they consider themselves a civic health organization, which means getting involved in political and social issues. They're really known for creative events. So this whole year they're doing a series on how to own aspects of your society. So last month they did one on how to own your elections, and they had all the municipal candidates come together, and you could just build a city with Legos with the candidates and talk about your issues. This month, they're having How to Own Your Emergency Services. And so we'll be presenting as Dasher, but some of the emergency services that we're trying to talk about is how do we expand what emergency crisis looks like in community, how do we respond to it? And so one will be food insecurity. And so, you know, how can we create an emergency response around food insecurity of Denver and beyond? So that's on May 18th at the McNichols building from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. So yeah, I can always share that information through email as well, but yeah. But just so, you know, I think that'd be an interesting event for folks in this room. But.
Thank you.
Also, Max, do you want to?
Yeah, so in June, and I think we'll get some of the logistics out, the social marketing campaign for SNAP Ed, that's the obesity prevention arm of SNAP Benefits, is going to be launching our social marketing campaign webinar. We're really excited about the marketing materials, and so this will be kind of the display of the entire campaign and what you can expect with it. And so I think the date we were looking at was actually the hour before this meeting begins. And so Rescue, the group that we heard present at one of our meetings recently, will be the group that's running that launch. And so we can talk a little bit about maybe inviting everyone to come to that beforehand, an hour before, if we have technology to do it. But I'll be releasing some materials through the Blueprint listserv. So thank you.
Congratulations. Yeah. Awesome. Okay, well, thanks, everyone.